Welcome back, everybody. It's probably good to see me again. We're gonna be back on the F100 project this week because we took a week off. We were down in Texas. You guys, I hope, enjoyed watching those videos of the Lone Star Throwdown coverage. And we went off-roading with our brother Paul at Hidden Falls Adventure Park, if I got the name right. If they pay me, I get it right. We're going to do some front end work today because we're getting super close to putting the actual sheet metal on, the fenders and grill and all that good stuff, and wheel wells. We're going to have to do some trimming there, maybe a little bit of fabricating. I think there's a light amount of rust repair that unfortunately we're going to have to do as well. But while we were in Texas, we picked up a few important things. One of which is this giant box that has a radiator and a shroud and an electric fan in it from Cold Case. We also picked up seat belts from Summit, JLT catch can assembly, and the super cool hat and a t-shirt. So what I mean by front end work is we ran into a little trouble on the steering rack that we got from the salvage with our Crown Vic front end. Unfortunately, both inner tie rods were bent. So when we went to adjust it for kind of just eyeball aligning it, they just were warped as all get out. And unfortunately, there's no good way of changing those out except replacing the entire rack, which is not a bad idea because you're gonna get new seals and kind of a guaranteed to work correctly. So I think this one was from O'Reilly and it's a remanufactured one. I did take off the electronic solenoid. I see this comes up a lot about what to do about it because of like the speed sensitive steering that these cars came with, that being the Crown Vic, that at speed they wanted to have a little more resistance in the steering wheel. So I think the electromagnet would become charged more and restrict the flow, but I'm kind of making all this up as I go. I'm not sure if that's really true or not. Basically, I just took the clip off the top of the solenoid and removed it. I did have to take this from the old rack. This takes a giant 35mm socket to pull it out and a rather large cheater bar, to be honest with you. So the pro tip is, if you're going to exchange your steering rack, they've got those big tools on the shelf. Let them take it out. Also on our list to do before we get the front end put on and make things hard to get to are these coilovers. These are from Andrew Peterson or ATP Performance. Maybe I'll put a link on the screen. They're Viking Shocks and coilovers, and they're two-way adjustable. Two-way means they're both adjustable for compression and rebound, and you can add and subtract those as you see fit. You can feel they're a really positive notch there. So they're also adjustable as far as your ride height goes. Now, according to Andrew, if you bolt these in, and basically all they did was just snug up the springs, you can see they're not super tight. If you bolt these in just with the nuts making contact with these springs, it should lower your truck about 1.5 inches. I'm assuming it's gonna lower ours more than that because I'm pretty sure we have the police package, because ours doesn't drop at all when we let it off a jack, and I'll show you that right now. So when I ordered these, I asked for the lightest weight ones that he had, which means daily driver, cruise around comfort with a small block, because he offers it for firm ride or autocross with a small block, then with a big block. And all that is just changing the resistance of the spring. These are 500-pound springs based on what I can decipher from the part number. And that's what we're after on this truck. One of the nice things they also sent was both spanner wrenches, because these nuts are different. And it's not like the old single tooth style where you just grab one and turn it. You actually have to slide these in from underneath for them to be positively locked. And then the other one has to be done the same way. And then you can make your adjustments ride height wise and then lock them together so that it doesn't move while you're underway. I'm kind of curious how much those are going to drop the front end of our truck, even without the fenders and hood and grill on here and front bumper, radiator, coolant. So that's additional weight. But I'm going to go ahead and get a good measurement on it right now before we lift it up and start changing the parts out. Measuring from the bottom of the frame where the front leaf spring mount used to be, we're going to reference to these numbers. You're gonna wanna start by supporting the truck with jack stands. I like to put them behind this front suspension. That way the jack stands aren't in my way up here when I'm moving this floor jack around. Because as you'll see later, we'll probably need it underneath this lower control arm to support it when we break the ball joint loose. Take the nuts off of your tie rod ends and drop them out of the spindle, which ours were already loose because we just put a new steering rack in. And then take the nuts off of your anti-sway bar. And it may not drop out of the way just yet with this lower control arm connected, but at least you'll have it ready to go when it does drop loose. Yes, one handy thing is 15/16 is the size of, or that probably converts to something metric, is the size of the nut and the bolt that holds the lower shock on, as well as the nut for this lower ball joint. Alright, so the bottom one is loose until it started to turn that ball joint. And then this top one I took off, it's a 21 millimeter. Because if you kind of look at the geometry of it, you want this to go down and out of the way so you can get this spring assembly out. The best way to do that is going to be drop this down, which is a little, maybe not necessary, but I like that we have that flexibility with this nut backed off. This upper control arm, we can break it loose, and then it can be raised up out of our way while we get this spring out. We should be able to get that other side disconnected, and then we can swing the sway bar up and out of our way. Oh, always keep an eye on what your brake lines are doing. Ours are fine right now, they're not in a bind or anything, so it can rest there. Went ahead and threaded the nut back onto the lower shock bolt. There shouldn't be any tension on it since everything's released. Kind of get it moving. And put the nut on there so we don't beat up the end of the threads. Otherwise, you may roll the starter threads over and you'll never get that nut started again without chasing it. And bolts this size, it's not a good time. Alright. I hope that didn't look easy because it kind of wasn't. I did get the passenger side off finally, so they're both removed and the sway bar completely out of the way. I just need to remember to put that thing back in the way at the right amount, at the right time. Otherwise you can't really line that bolt up through the spindle. So one thing I noticed, these were quick struts. They're Monroe shocks, but they're assembled when you buy them as a quick strut, so you don't have to worry about compressing them, because these are under a lot of pressure and they're sort of dangerous from the factory. So if you ever do replace your struts, just order them like this and bolt them on and call it a day. Now, one thing I noticed, they are the same length from the top plate to the eyelets, which tells me the idea here was you could use these for factory ride height if you so desired to put that much preload on the springs. These don't have that kind of preload, and if you look at the size of these springs in comparison to each other, I feel like there's going to be a lot of compression pretty quick with our suspension. So I've gone ahead and put the compression and the rebound on their softest setting for now. I guess we'll see how that works out. And let's see, we'll get this in here. And just reuse these factory nuts on the top. I've got it hanging there, and you've got these two bushings that sit on the side of the lower shock. as you thread the bolt through. So you kind of want to use your floor jack to raise this up and get that height adjustment just right to start the bolt in. I want to point out I set the knobs facing outwards. I'm afraid they'd make contact with the lower control arm if it was facing in. I think there's no reason to get it too snug right away. I do want to get this sway bar dropped into place now before I close up this steering knuckle, because it does kind of require proper timing the way this is designed. You won't be happy if you're trying to put this together and the sway bar doesn't move. Phew. That'll do it. Alright, so start the sway bar, then upper control arm. Keep your hardware close so you don't have to look for it when you're holding everything together. I think, yeah, if you rotate your spindle, you can still get a socket on this upper ball joint nut while the sway bar is in place. So all we've got left on the suspension is this sway bar nut, which I found, well, by the way, it's a 14 millimeter and a 17 millimeter wrench. It's best to just hold your 14 millimeter out here on the nut and then tighten the inside of the link with your 17 millimeter, because unless you take the caliper and the rotor off, you can't really put a socket in here on that properly. And even if you try to get in there with some kind of swivels or something like that, you risk beating up the inside of your brake rotor. It's probably not the best idea. Ow! Now to finish up our steering, you're going to need an 18 millimeter wrench and an 8 millimeter. And it's good to use a box end. This is a ratcheting wrench, but if you can set that box end over the center of that ball joint, and then you can tighten the nut with an open end. It's not terribly long-winded. You get it snugged up in no time. I do want to point out, when you replace these rack and pinions, you want to thread these tie rod ends to about center of the amount of threads that they offer. You shouldn't need too much adjustment one way or another, but they'll turn here in order to adjust your toe in and toe out. Wow, that's a lot. All right, let's see where we're at. The driver's side was 13 5/8. Now 10 5/8. Passenger side was 13 1/2. Now 10 7/16, close enough to a half. We can just call it 3 inches on both sides in front of the frame, or on the front of the frame in those factory locations. I guess the good news is there's still quite a bit of travel left on this shock. with the height that it's sitting at right now. I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but probably 2 inches of down travel. But I don't think we want it to sit any lower than it is right now. We may run into issues with too much rake, and then we've got to lower the back. And I kind of like the height that the back sits at currently, because remember, we're not trying to drag the ground with the frame. We want a nice ride, comfortable truck, and that's what we're after. So for scale, I put this tape measure up here, and it's right at exactly 5 foot at the top of the door opening. So that's about a comfortable height to climb in and out of it. Next week, we're gonna get on and tackle those power steering lines, because I don't wanna rush that, and I feel like taking our time to make a good video will probably be productive for other people in the future, because the question seems to come up a lot. And speaking of questions, I get a lot of people that ask about things that they see on the truck. And if it takes a long time for me to describe, I'm probably just gonna copy and paste a link of a previous video where we covered that part. So please don't think I'm mean. If it's something easy, I'll answer pretty easily. But if it's gonna take a big description, you're probably gonna watch another video. Hope you guys liked it. Shout out to Andrew for getting me these coilovers. I know during COVID you had a pretty big challenge with getting those out the door. And they're awesome. They look great. We'll see how they ride. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We'll see you later.